Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, yesterday we looked at Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, which is Moses' instructions about divorce and remarriage. I think we looked at this passage pretty carefully yesterday and what Moses meant. But today I want to kind of follow up on that because Jesus is asked about this particular passage during the time of the Gospels. And I want to look at that time Jesus receives the question about this passage and how he responded. Now, you remember the first couple of verses of Deuteronomy chapter 24, Moses says, "If a man marries a woman who becomes displeased in him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce." Now, in Jesus' time, in New Testament times, a great theological discussion had arisen, a controversy even, over what Moses meant about something indecent about her. Remember, I told you yesterday, this passage in Deuteronomy 24 are the instructions for if you divorced and then you remarry. But the focus in Jesus' day was on that grounds for divorce. Moses said if a man finds something indecent about her, then he can write her a certificate of divorce. And the controversy swirling in Jesus' day was, what was that something indecent that provided a ground for divorce? That's what they asked Jesus about in Matthew chapter 19. So today we're looking at Matthew chapter 19, the first few verses, when Jesus is asked this question. Let's start reading verse 3. It says, "Some Pharisees came to Jesus and asked him," they were testing him, it says, by the question, but they asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" And you notice how they asked that? Is it lawful to divorce your wife for any and every reason? Now they are referring back to Deuteronomy chapter 24, when Moses says if you find something displeasing or indecent about your wife. Now in Jesus' day there were two schools of thought. There was one school that said what that means was if a man finds something in his wife that he doesn't like, that indecency could be anything he doesn't like. She burned his breakfast in the morning. She didn't talk nice to him yesterday afternoon. Anything he finds in her he doesn't like, he can divorce her for that. That was one school of thought. But there was another school of thought that said, no, when Moses said if he finds something indecent in her, Moses meant something serious like unfaithfulness. In other words, if a man finds his wife has been unfaithful to him, then he can divorce her. So you see, there were these two schools of thought. And they argued back and forth who was right. That's what they're asking Jesus. Which school of thought do you belong to? That's when they say, can a man divorce his wife for any and every reason? They were asking, really, do you belong to that one school of thought that says anything's good for divorce? Or do you belong to the stricter school of thought that says divorce can only occur for physical unfaithfulness or infidelity? So they're asking Jesus to interpret Deuteronomy chapter 24. Now, when Moses first gave those instructions so many years before, he just simply said, if you're going to divorce your wife, write a certificate. And then he gave some things about when you could, and also there was one stipulation, when you could not remarry. So they're asking Jesus now, what was the ground of divorce? However, Jesus is not going to get involved in that debate. He's not going to get involved in their argument. You might wonder why they even asked Jesus. It says they were trying to test him by asking the question. What was the test? Well, they thought that if they forced Jesus to take a side in that theological discussion, at least half of the people would be mad with him. In other words, whatever school he sided with, the other school would be mad. So they were hoping that at least half of the people would get mad at Jesus, whichever side he took. However, Jesus said, I'm not going to get involved in your theological discussion. He said, let me give you another understanding of this whole question. In verse 4, he says, haven't you read that at the beginning, the Creator, that's God, made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother, be united with his wife, the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus is saying the ideal for marriage, what God intended at creation, is that marriage be for life. A divorce is a falling short of what God originally intended. It's a tragedy whenever it occurs because it's not what God intended. So rather than getting involved in your discussion about grounds for divorce, what Moses meant, I simply say, let's strive to make marriages permanent for life, and not be looking for reasons to divorce. But then they're going to say, well, why then did Moses give that command that a husband could give his wife a certificate of divorce? Why did Moses allow for it? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. In other words, divorce is allowed according to Moses and according to the scripture. That's Deuteronomy 24. It's allowed simply because we live in a broken world. After the fall, everything in this world got broken. And sometimes that brokenness affects marriages, and sometimes divorce occurs. It's not what God intended. In a perfect world, divorce would never occur, but in a broken world, it sometimes does happen. It was allowed. Moses allowed it, and Moses was speaking for the Lord. Moses allowed it because we're a broken people. But strive for the best. It would be best if divorce never occurred. But when it does occur, understand it was because of brokenness, and God does give you a second chance. But I'm not going to get involved in your debate about the grounds for divorce. Just understand we would just strive for perfection. But if we don't achieve it, sometimes brokenness does occur. Sometimes marriages don't work. Sometimes divorce does happen. Saddens God, but he does allow it because of the brokenness of our lives until redemption is complete. Hope you join us tomorrow as we continue looking at our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.